Welcome to Shellphone, the podcast that gives the ocean its very own hotline. Join us as we hear from ocean stewards, discover threats to ocean health, and learn ways we can all answer the ocean's call. This podcast is brought to you in part by the Tampa Bay Estuary Program and Coastal Creative. I'm Harmony Dawson, and joining us this episode is Emy Daniels. She is an artist based in Oregon who is currently doing a residency program at the Hatfield Marine Science Center, where she collaborates with researchers and students and finds inspiration for her art. So before we get into talking about art, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background in marine science. What did that look like, and what kinds of things did you study?
I did a bachelor's and master's in biology through the University of California, San Diego. And the master's program was really nice because you got in based on a GPA and having a lab that was willing to take you for 2 years, and I didn't have to go through the whole graduate exams and applications. And as an undergraduate, I was able to get into a biological oceanography lab. I did a lot of microscopy, so they were automating the microscopy. So I'd put a microscope slide on the microscope, tell the computer to start, and it would move around to these random points on the slide and then take images. And then someone else would later analyze all those images. And so the biological oceanography groups at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, I kind of think of it as they go out to sea and collect a lot of data, and then they come back to the labs and just process. So I was just kind of like a processor after the fact. And I had the opportunity to go on a few research cruises through them, which was really exciting to be out at sea for like a week at a time. I think the longest one was 15 days. And then I moved on to a marine biology lab. So the marine biology groups were more lab focused and experiment focused. And that's where I did my master's program. We're studying phytoplankton, so microalgae that are microscopic in size. There's bacteria and eukaryotic organisms that photosynthesize, so really small bacteria, and then kind of larger algae that we think of or might know of. And studying predator-prey interactions, so larger organisms that would eat the algae and what kind of effects they have in the environment. And then after I did my master's program, that lab hired me as a lab technician. So then I was doing a lot of different things like carrying out experiments, training undergraduate students or grad students, and working with the different postdocs and graduate students that were coming into the lab. Yeah, so I did that about 10 years. I was in San Diego through UCSD and Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And then I moved to Oregon and worked in a microbiology department for Oregon State University for a little over a year. But I was commuting a long way, so that's when I kind of stopped. And that was sort of the end of my science career. Not to say the end, but as far as working in employment.
What inspired you to shift your focus towards art after you decided to not continue with the lab-based science work?
So I moved to Newport, Oregon, and they have Hatfield Marine Science Center. So I thought I would be able to maybe get a job there, but didn't. And that's when I worked for the main campus through microbiology. And so, yeah, I was always there. I couldn't quite get in, but it was something that I'd hoped to get connected with at some point. But because I didn't, I ended up taking some time to do a yoga teacher training and did some yoga teaching. I also wanted to have kids, so now I have 2 little kids. They're 2 and 4. And that kind of changed things, I guess, for me, that now I didn't want to have a full-time job if I could help it and be able to, be with my kids a lot. And so the idea of getting back into working, I don't want, again, to be in a full-time position if I can have more freedom by being an artist and be able to incorporate my kids in my work and have them experience what I experience. And yeah, this last year has been really cool, and the different opportunities that I've had, and they've been able to see what I've been doing and work with me in a lot of ways. I'm still interested in like science and research and marine biology, but pushing the art also to be like more creative and to like get into the topics that I'm interested in and not have any sort of boundaries. Like I'm pretty free to explore whatever I want, whenever I want. But I do have to give myself some boundaries to be focused and fulfill a project. And
Yeah, that's great to have a little bit more flexibility in what you want to be focusing on at different times. And then you can do like a project on one topic and then move on to the next topic that you're interested in. So you had a studio art minor in college, but you've been continuing to develop your art skills since then. What are some resources that have been helpful to you in doing that?
Part of the draw to Newport here is there's a large arts community, and they have a lot of community projects that are going on, like there's the Nye Beach Banner Project, which they have banners available for any artist to come pick up, and then everybody gets to paint on it, and then they coat them and hang them through the summer outside. There's also what's called a pushpin show, and that's open to the community to hang anything they can put up with 4 pushpins. So I think being able to have local arts programming and opportunities helped me to just sort of branch out, try new things. Like the pushpin show, you can be really creative, or the banner project, you can kind of have a statement because it's out in public for people to see. So that's one way, to just like getting to know other artists in the community, seeing what other people are doing. And I jumped onto a mural project with a friend as well. And then also, I enjoy studying and taking classes. And there are the MOOC courses, the massive open online courses. And those are free, and they're like audited classes from different universities. So I've done a natural history illustration course, and I'm doing an infographics course. So those are really cool ways to take advantage of classes and learn new skills.
Cool. That looks like something that I might want to look into.
Yeah, they're fun. Sometimes the classes are open and always available, and some of them you have to like wait until they come up and then do complete them at the same time.
How do you see science, art, and activism overlapping? And what does the future of bringing these together look like to you?
So, in thinking about this question, I added in community. So, science, art, activism, and community. And I think like activism and art has always had a link. Throughout history, like art is a way to express your opinions about the current state of the world or whatever's happening around you. And then activism is also linked to community, to benefit the community and uplift the community that you're in. And so art and community is also linked in that way, of art benefiting a community, like murals and things like that. But I feel like now, I think science and art used to have a connection with naturalists who are going out and seeing new organisms and environments and wanting to document that before photography. And so they needed to be artists in order to depict what they were finding. But now there's, I think, a big push to bring back art and science because, like with STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, sort of gets kind of dry. And I think students learn it as like just sort of learn this, memorize it, and repeat. And it can lose its creativity in that way. And so STEAM is then when they've incorporated art into the process. And I think having art as a way to express yourself, try new ideas, experiment with different mediums or colors or ideas helps better the process of doing science and other technological kind of fields. So like architecture, right? You can just have a square building and it's functional, but it doesn't maybe have an aesthetic. But as an architect, you could be more aesthetic and create, these different shaped buildings that have this different visual appeal that break up how the skyline might look. And Oregon State University, where I'm doing the artist in residence now, they're doing a big push to bridge science and art for undergraduates. And then the science and art, or science and community link, has also sort of been separate. But again, OSU and Hatfield Marine Science Center here in particular, there's a lot of organizations and groups, but like the Oregon Sea Grant, which is a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration program, NOAA, like their focus is to bridge the science community and the general community or stakeholders that are in this area. And so we have a big fishing community in Newport, and that's a way that scientists and fishing community can work together to come up with solutions, to work together towards things, rather than the scientists saying like, we need to save these species, and fishermen are like, well, we need to have our livelihood. So they're trying to bridge the science and community gap to work together to create solutions. So I feel like that's something that's being worked at more now. So then the science and activism link, I think, is the weakest link. And that's an area I feel like pushing more we'll talk about my zine a little bit, and that's was trying to approach this, that as scientists, you feel you want to be factual, peer-reviewed, don't want to just throw out assumptions or anything without evidence. And activism can be or should be evidence-based, but activism can also push the voices of people who don't have a voice in science, or be the voice of a community that maybe is not benefiting from science or not being able to influence science in the direction that it should be going. I feel like it's all it's all kind of linked, and there's some like broken links or like not well developed links. And I'd like to use, I think deep down activism is the drive, like what do I really care about and value? And then I'm interested in science and art. So how do I use what I care about to influence those realms and bring them together? And then also then how does it benefit my community at large and the world at large?
Yeah, all of those different pieces, science, art, community, activism, they're very broad and their own things, but overlap in a lot of ways too. It's a lot of big concepts to think about, but I think they all apply to the work that you're doing. So that's a good way to see them like in action, working together. And yeah, we'll talk more about what that looks like later when we're talking about your zine and the different projects that you've been doing at the Marine Science Center. So before we talk about that, I'd like to ask you about another program that you did at the Yaquina Head Outstanding Natural Area. Can you tell us a little bit about this place and your experience being an artist in residence there?
Yeah, so this is in Newport, Oregon, where I live. It's a headland that sticks out about 1 mile, and it had been used as a quarry site. And then some local activists had come together to try to get them to stop because if the headland was completely taken down and mined, that we would lose a windbreak for the town, that first Newport, that's just south of it. And so then the Bureau of Land Management bought the land or something. So now it's a Bureau of Land Management, a BLM site, and they manage the lighthouse. It's an active lighthouse on the head there. So this was their first artist in residence program, and that was funded with the Oregon Coast Council for the Arts, which is a very cool group. So they run like the Performing Arts Center in Newport and the Visual Arts Center, and they're the ones that run these community arts programs here. So they did it in the late spring, which is an ideal time because there's a lot of migrating birds coming to breed on the rocks. The seals are giving birth to pups, and whales come to forage, like especially the gray whales migrate through here. So I had the opportunity, it was about 3 weeks, to be on site, creating artwork and just spending time observing this environment. And it's really dynamic. Huge waves and high winds come through like throughout the year when we have storms. It was also a great time for me to have that time to myself. So my younger kid had just turned 1. And this was like the first time I had like hours to myself to just sort of sit outside and look through binoculars and enjoy myself. I was always enjoying myself, but have some peace and quiet and just watch nature. So I did a lot of plein air painting, which is painting outdoors. And I was just really getting into it that year. So I just did a lot of that while I was the artist in residence. And it was a way to observe the different sites like around the head. And for me, depicting the colors and the different rock formations, and then also trying to incorporate wildlife into my landscapes, because before that I didn't have any in there. So to put seals on the beach or include the birds nesting on the rocks. Yeah, it was a really good time for, kind of bring back a science like observation brain, and then incorporate the drawing of these species and like how do they fly, how do they land, how do they gather together. And you also get to hear like the chatter. Like it was just really loud with all the different seabirds. There's a lot of different types. And I got to learn and identify all of them and identify their calls a little bit too.
That's really cool. I imagine spending so much time around one place, you do get to know a lot better the species that are there and the way that they behave with each other and all of that. What are some of the other species of wildlife that you would see around there? Because I imagine that it's very different than what we see here in Florida. You've already mentioned that it was kind of rocky shores and lots of seabirds and seals, but are there any others that stood out to you?
Yeah. So it's an upwelling site along like California, Oregon, Washington. In the springtime, we get a lot of upwelling. So deep, cold water that's rich in nutrients comes up and then sparks the phytoplankton and algae to bloom and then up the food web and creating an abundance of fish for foraging animals like whales. So gray whales come. Also, a lot of orca sightings, and the orcas were even going into the bay from the Yaquina River, which is like 3 miles south of that. But I was able to see the orcas pass by the head. I don't think it's incredibly common, but they were also seen this year too. There's a lot of different seabirds, like there's 3 types of cormorants that come, common murres. They're the ones that come in like tens of thousands, I think. Then they just top these rocks and they're all squished together and covering their eggs until they're ready to hatch and then move on. Yeah, seals and sea lions are here year round, I think. But then also there's the tide pools there are really amazing. So there's a lot of tide pool creatures that you get to see. I was able to see a giant Pacific octopus in the tide pools, nudibranchs, a lot of little tiny sea slugs. I love the tide pools. That's probably my favorite place to be. But there's mussels, barnacles, gooseneck barnacles. There's a lot of different shellfish on the rocks. Yeah.
Awesome. Did the plein air painting allow you to engage with the public while you were actually out there painting? I'm not sure if there were lots of visitors who go to this area, or did you more engage with the public after paintings were done and like displaying them?
So it is a very popular tourist site. So when I was painting outdoors and set up, I did get a lot of interest in what I was doing. And I think that's pretty fun to talk to people. I like to ask if they do any art and encourage like young kids to bring their notebooks and pens or maybe paints or markers just to have them with them all the time so that they can feel free to draw and stop on a bench and take that time. So yeah, that was a good way to communicate with the public. And so the artist in residence programs, I feel like looking at different programs, a lot of them are focused for the artist to have an opportunity to be inspired by the location. A lot of them are remote, or there's some like in national parks. And then some are kind of tied to community, like there might be other artists there that you can connect with. And this one at Yaquina Head, Outstanding Natural Area, because it's a Bureau of Land Management site, they were very interested in the public outreach component. So having an artist there to talk to, that was kind of their thing. So they put out a sign that the artist in residence was on site, so you could kind of look for them. Yeah, and then I also did have the opportunity to show my painting at the Visual Arts Center and have a solo show there. And that was another opportunity to talk about the artwork and talk about my experience there. And then I also they required that you do a community event. So yeah, so with most artists in residences, you don't necessarily have to produce anything. The idea is more that you get inspired and hopefully will maybe experiment with your artwork or learn new things. So their main focus then was like to have this community project. So I hosted a plein air day for people to come out with their paints or just drawing material and come out. Of course, it was like the one day that was super wet and rainy, and it had been like sunny before that. But there was still a nice turnout. And so I gave a little bit of like tips and tricks to think about when you're painting outdoors and like looking at the shapes and kind of think of the big picture before getting into details. So that was another way for more of the local community to be able to come out and have this opportunity to do some artwork at Yaquina Head. Yeah, it was a really fun time.
Yeah, that sounds great, especially being able to bring in and encourage other people to create art there as well. After that, you became the first artist in residence at the Hatfield Marine Science Center. What were the overall goals of this program, and did you have any personal goals outside of that?
Yeah, so this program, Artist in Residence program, and Hatfield Marine Science Center is the graduate school and research outpost for Oregon State University. But they also house like NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, so a lot of different state and federal agencies as well. Their goals of the program and a lot of these up-and-coming like science and art artist in residencies at universities is to bridge that art and science connection So they wanted an artist to be here to engage with scientists and students and hopefully ask like different questions that they might not have thought of. And then for the artist to try and communicate science to the public in some way. So again, there's also no expectation of a project or any sort of final product or anything to come out of it, but more this engagement and communication between the artist and the different groups that are here. For me, a personal goal or what I wanted to start with, and we'll talk about more, is a zine. So I put out a call to the Hatfield community to kind of poke the scientists to be more of that activist, so to be more opinionated about their science. So it was kind of, the question was like, the climate crisis is here, and you have to like wait to put out your research until it's been peer reviewed, and it like takes a long time. But like, what do you want to say about it now in just your open voice? And I was like, you can be anonymous too if you want. So my first goal was just to try to understand, what do scientists know and what do they want to communicate about that now. But now it's really evolved quickly into a lot of different things. So it's opened up a lot of different avenues for me to look at the grant writing process, or to, where to seek funding for artwork. So one of the labs hosts an Artist at Sea program where the artist gets to go out on a research cruise and, again, not necessarily produce anything, but they get to experience being out at sea. They get to see what researchers do, how they deploy their instruments, fishing nets and stuff, and then hopefully create some artwork out of that. Again, communicating what does science do for us. So I've also am possibly going to get into doing some infographics. So that's why I'm doing this Coursera class on it. I think it's helpful for me also, like infographics, graphic design for Instagram, for my own website, that kind of thing. But also I like the idea of how to take science and put it in some simple visual representation. And, there's an element of artistry and design and color layout, but it's also very science heavy in representing data and information. Like a good infographic should make you feel empowered and like you understand what you're reading, and a bad infographic would make you feel kind of dumb, like I don't get what's happening. But if you're a good designer, then you display the information in a way that can be captured in just like a few seconds, instead of reading and trying to understand a table or something, or read it like a science paper, right? So I enjoy that idea of, it's like a puzzle to bring in all this information, and how do you simplify it, which is a challenge for scientists, because there's always a lot of caveats, or like the larger picture, like where it all fits in. So you also have to be really careful about how you display information too.
So one of your previous projects was a painting of the blue mud shrimp for a stamp contest. I would love to hear about your process of learning about this species and going through the process of creating the painting.
So the stamp contest was through Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and they do this annually, the Habitat Conservation Stamp Contest. So they have a list of organisms that are threatened in Oregon, and you can choose any of them and depict that organism and its habitat. And so when I was looking through the list, I saw the blue mud shrimp, and I had already personally known Dr. John Chapman, and he will tell you anything you want to know about the shrimp, and he's an advocate for the shrimp. So I reached out to him to talk about it. And I think what was really cool about the whole process was that as an artist who wanted to represent this shrimp, like if I just Google blue mud shrimp, there really aren't a lot of photos. You'd have to go through like some of the scientific journals to get more detailed images of them. A lot of the pictures are of John Chapman holding the shrimp in his hand and like news articles and stuff. And so to be able to work with him closely, it made the artistic process easier, faster, because I didn't have to do all the research on my own. So he took me out to the mud flats in the bay, in the Yaquina Bay, to collect shrimp. So I got to see how he gathers them for scientific research, how the environment looks. So I took some pictures, and that's, if you're watching the video, this painting here, that's just depicting the early morning when we went out on a low tide to gather the shrimp. But then it has a like inset blown up of what the actual shrimp looks like in its burrow. So they're only like 6 to 7 inches long, and they fit perfectly within their burrow. So the importance of this shrimp is that they are ecosystem engineers. So they build these burrows. They actually excrete like a cement from their anus, and they line the walls of the burrow with this. So it's kind of this harder form. But it can house other organisms, other species. I have this little clam depicted that sticks their siphon into the burrow so that they can eat whatever's in there as well. They think that maybe they're farming a bacteria on the lining of the burrow and not actually like filter feeding like algae or things that are in the environment outside of the burrow. And then this population is the last large population from California to Alaska. And there's been this invasive species that gets into their carapace, so it's like under their armpit, and it sucks their blood. It doesn't kill them outright, but is preventing reproduction. So the population is just declining. And this population, Dr. John Chapman says, will probably crash and be extinct in 10 years. So there's not a lot of time. And then it's already crashed in many of the environments up and down the coast here. So the story to tell is like how important they are in the ecosystem. Like if you look at a mud flat, you just see mud and holes, but you don't really know what's going on underneath. And he talks about that as a reverse coral reef. So imagine how that structure is built up, but this is underground going down into the sediment. So I'm also trying to think of ways of maybe doing projects in the future of depicting this organism, what those burrow structures look like so they can be visualized. But he also does resin casts where he has poured resin into the burrows and let it all harden, and then they dig it all up and kill all the animals, unfortunately. And then pull these up, and you have these beautiful, resin. They're sort of clear. You can see the shrimp in them and see the shape and the complexity of the texture of the burrow lining. So he has these as well, and they like do a lot of measurements, which is, kind of an art form in itself to see these resin casts. And so some of these opportunities is he can write a grant to include some sort of artistic representation. So we've talked about like a children's book or some graphic novel or something like that that tells the story of the shrimp to get people to understand their story and why it's important that we do what we can to save them. And what can we do when it's an invasive parasite? We don't know, but it's also why we need to advocate for funding science and basic research science too. Yeah, so that was kind of the first connected project I've done that is completed too. The stamp didn't win or place, but people were excited about it anyways because there aren't always a lot of depiction of invertebrates, and there are a few crabs and shrimp that were done.
Yeah, that is part of why I find that project really interesting is because it's a species that might be hard to really visualize and see if you're not actually in the wild looking at it or reading about it and seeing the pictures of him holding the shrimp or things like that. So having a painting or even going further with an artistic representation of what's going on with that species is a great way to bring it to the attention of new audiences.
Yeah.
You've also mentioned that you are planning to hold more drawing and painting workshops for students that also incorporate note-taking and observation and curiosity. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Right. So I did do one workshop so far with the student group on the main campus at Oregon State. And that was really cool because they anticipated having 20 to 30 people show up. And that's kind of what they normally see for an event. But we had almost 60 or maybe over 60 people show up, which was good learning experience for me too. Like it was just sort of an open come if you want. And we brought supplies, but I'm like, in the future, maybe it should be restricted depending on what kind of supplies you get. So luckily I got charcoal wood twigs, so they're easy to break. So we just broke a lot of them in half, and then I had lots of extra paper. So we were able to accommodate everybody. And I brought just a bunch of shells and some crab skeletons and things that people could draw from. And I talked a little bit about like scientific illustration on what kind of careers you can have with that. And then we went over some basics to drawing. So some of the students were artists themselves, but most of them were also like science majors. So we covered, like basics of values, like the lightness and darkness of your drawing, and then contours and how to represent it three-dimensionally, shadows and things. So it was a really fun workshop, and it seemed like everybody really enjoyed it. But yeah, the idea of taking the time to observe an object and draw it. So if you're just looking at something or maybe looking up close in a microscope, I think you miss things when you don't try to, even just writing about it, like, what are you seeing? It forces you to formalize, what you're seeing, written it out. But also drawing it is really helpful in understanding the structure and how things might be connected to within the organism. So if you're looking at an organism and they have like 10 legs, like where are the legs attached and how close are they together, or which part of the body are they on? And you just notice things a lot differently when you're actually trying to draw and represent it and all of that. So I feel like it's a good way for people to look more closely at something that visually with our eyes we might just skim over. And then I'd like to have this second component of a field journal, like outdoor aspect to it, where you're drawing more from life and working on like quick sketching skills. So how to just get like a gesture of an organism, like a bird that's flying by, like how do you try to capture that in a simple drawing? And then, later on you can take this information and create a different drawing from it later. I think that was my approach at the Koett-Cronn residency. Take the time to observe, take notes in your book, and then later you'll have these new questions based on like what you're trying to draw and why are they flying that way, or different questions come up, I think. So I haven't done that field component yet. A couple of people have reached out about doing this workshop for a group or to include like faculty and graduate students. And then I will also host one here at Hatfield Marine Science Center. And I think there's a lot of interest in it because everybody pretty much loves to draw, I think, and there aren't always opportunities to do it. If you already love the marine environment and now you get to learn how to draw marine organisms, that really attracts people. And to have these just opportunities to create and laugh, feel silly about it all. I try to be not too serious or like, just encouraging, because people also feel like, oh, I'm not a good artist or something, but you really just have to practice and take the time to do it. And it's a skill to learn. So you learn some techniques and apply them, and it can change how you draw too.
Yeah, I was going to say that workshops like that are a great way to either continue working on a skill that you're already great at or dip your toes into doing something new and learn about something that you're interested in, but without too much pressure or stress about being good enough or, at a certain level. And I'm glad it was so popular the first time that you did it. It also reminds me of in one of my writing classes, we did a field trip to go to a nature preserve here in St. Petersburg. And at first we just walked around the preserve and kind of looked at things and looked for a particular plant species that we were interested in. And then we all went back to this outdoor classroom that was there and wrote about all of the little details that we could remember about it. It was a similar kind of experience that was really cool to do and not something that I had done in any of my writing classes beforehand.
Yeah, I think it's nice to take the time to reflect on what you were observing and feeling in that environment.
Thank you to Chopping Block Soaps for sponsoring this episode of Shellphone. This family-owned business makes my favorite soaps out there. They are dedicated to using high-quality, natural ingredients to create their handmade soaps and skincare products. One of my favorites is the Utah. This soap is made with shea and cocoa butter, coconut and olive oil, cedarwood and lavender essential oils, sage, beetroot, water, and lye. That's it. To browse Chopping Block Soap's selection of products, go to their website at choppingblocksoap.com and use the discount code Shellphone for 20% off your order.
Going into next year, you're going to begin working on a new project with Hatfield's Innovation Lab focused on fishing practices and the community. Can you tell us more about this project and what new types of arts that you're going to be exploring?
Yeah, so the Artist in Residence program was started. This is a new building. It's actually a tsunami evacuation site. So in case we have this gigantic earthquake, we can just run up to the top of the building instead of far away to a hill. So it's a new building, and then there's an innovation lab is right outside one of my windows here. their purpose is to help researchers and students with technological things and like outfitting things. So if you have an instrument that you want to try to use and you want to use it underwater and it hasn't been developed that way, they can help you create an underwater housing for that. They can help with how to attach it to a boat so that it's transportable or functional from whatever you're using. And so they teach the skills to students. So they have a lot of interns that come in as well, or to whoever wants to do this project. Rather than just asking them to fabricate it, they also teach the skills for people and encourage people to do it themselves, So it's really cool space for that. And we have the opportunity to work with them if we want. And so I'm writing up a grant proposal now that's funded by the Oregon Sea Grant here. They want to be able to fund arts. So this is their pilot program that they're trying out this year. So I'll work in collaboration with the Innovation Lab, the iLab, to do welding and metal work, which I'm very excited about because I want to also try to move into like sculpture work and public art installations. So like I had that opportunity to work on a mural, but I also want to do like sculptural pieces that can help inform the science around the area that you're standing in. And so it's like nature, or it's site specific, So I would need to be able to work with materials that can withstand being outside and in the rain and on the coast. And they will be able to teach me all of that stuff. So the idea for this particular art piece for them and for the grant to fund it, the story I want to highlight is how the science community and the fishing community work together to develop excluder nets. So I think one of the big examples are like for shrimping, and that to collect the shrimp in these big trawler nets, they just catch a lot of bycatch by the nature of it. They're just catching all these other fish. So the excluder nets are nets that have a grate, like a barbecue grate, sort of at an angle within the net. And then at the top of the net, there's a hole so that as all the fish and shrimp go into the net, the shrimp will pass through the barbecue grill and go into the caught end and be caught. But all the fish will be too big to pass through, so they'll bounce off the grill and go out the top. So I think this was for fish. This might have also been for, I'm just like getting into everything about trawler nets and fishing nets. Also for sea turtles. So the idea that sea turtles are caught in a lot of these fishing industries, but if you use these nets, then the turtles also bounce off the grate and can leave the net at the top. There's also excluder nets for salmon, because salmon are really powerful swimmers. They can swim against a current and get out of the net. So I think they have an exit hole, but they also use a green light, I think, for the salmon, that they will see the light and swim towards that light and leave. And then the other fish that are smaller and can't swim against that current will be caught. So it's really nice highlight of how by working with a community, so the fishing community, learn what it is that they are trying to do, want to do. You can explain to them like, well, there's too much bycatch, or you're catching too many juvenile fish, or whatever the issue is. But you have to work together to come up with solutions. And here in Newport, Foul Weather Trawl is a company that hand makes fish nets. And I've also just sort of like dove into this, researching this project. So they still hand make nets, and they were really instrumental in creating these different nets because they're hand making them to develop nets that will exclude the bycatch. So I want to also be able to learn the net making skills. So this helps with the mission of Oregon Sea Grant with workforce development. So with welding training that I could do. And then also I'm interested in learning how to tie knots and weave. And I do like knitting and I do a lot of different things. So I think incorporating this, and then how do you elevate this to an art piece, and the understanding of community and how people work together is the goal of this project. And yeah, I'm like super fascinated to work with different materials, to have like an idea, and then what are the materials or ways to create an art piece to represent that. So I did a lot of that plein air painting last year, and I really haven't done many this year. And I just kind of get, bored and want to move on to something different. So it's, again, fun to like have this project, learn new skills, and then I can move on to something different. I'm reading about some different sculpture artists and how they have also approached that, like Ruth Asawa and Isamu Noguchi. And I think because as working with sculpture, You're also probably already doing like drawing and painting. So you're just creating like all these different opportunities and ways to represent things. How do you feel about them? And I think what sculpture does is make you think about the space and the size and how you're interacting with the piece more so than a 2D picture on a wall. So I'm really excited to work with the iLab, even without this project in particular getting funded, but to be able to take some time next year learning how to do the welding and metal work.
Awesome. That sounds exciting, definitely, to try something new and go into that. So finally, I'd like to talk about your project creating a zine series. My first question is, what is a zine and how do you make one?
Zines are short for magazine, and it's just like a self-published magazine or booklet that can be on anything that you want. So basically, creating a book that you want to share with people on your own. And the zine, there's like a huge zine culture. And so I didn't really know much about zines before, but suddenly they were on my radar and friends were sharing like some calls for art for some zines just before I started this residency, which is why then it was on my mind to create a zine with this community at Hatfield. And so they're, often on like pop culture or kind of obscure things that mass market for a magazine wouldn't cater to. But it also carries a lot of elements of activism and topics that maybe are more taboo and like wouldn't get published in something more mainstream. And I see it as a way of just another form of art to express yourself with more like written words, but also visual elements and not being censored. And you get to be your own editor and create it however you want. So making one, again, like diving into kind of like infographics and design layout helps with this. So I've been doing digital artwork. So I've recently got a new iPad and I use Procreate to do digital art. So I'm combining digital art that way. I'm combining like the different artwork that people have given me or written stuff that people have given me. And I'm using Canva to put it together as a layout. And so Canva is free. They also have a paid subscription that you can do as well. But Canva is really great for design stuff for like Instagram or other social media images that you want to use. So you can put in the visual elements and text and rearrange it. And I find it's pretty intuitive and easy to use. They have like free visual elements that you can use and then also like a paid version. And then a paid version also gets you to export it as a CMYK file for printing. But sometimes you don't always need that. Sometimes the printers can change that format. So RGB, red, green, blue for looking at something digitally on a computer screen versus the CMYK ink for printers, getting into all of that kind of design printing stuff. There's also like a super simple way to do a one-page zine. And so I, in light of current events, created a mini zine, and it's a one-page one where you can fold it up into a little booklet. So you have like a front cover, back cover, and then 6 pages on the inside. And that I've printed out a bunch, folded them. It's a little bit more informational than artistic, but you do have to have that visual design. And I've been handing those out at protests to share that with people. And I feel like because they're print, they need to be information that is like long-standing. They can also be kind of fast because it's a zine, right? You can come up with new stuff frequently. But when you read the print, it needs to be something that is engaging long enough beyond maybe what's happening in that moment. So compared to social media where we might be posting more immediate information. So I like the idea of doing this print version so that it can have a broader reach too. And for people who aren't, using social media for things, it's a way to get information out to people in a different format.
What is the theme and goal of the zine that you're making in collaboration with others at Hatfield?
So this, I'm calling it Revolution Zine. The idea that like the Earth rotates, right? But we revolve around the sun. So anyways, we're constantly moving, revolving. So I think of it also as evolution and like we need to keep changing. So this particular topic for Hatfield was the climate crisis and how do we, talk about it more straightforwardly, not with caveats and things. Yeah, so the audience here is like understands that the climate crisis is a thing and then what do we do about it? So it's not meant to bring people on board like this is why, like the climate crisis is happening. This is what's happening and why, and try to convert people, I guess. It's not trying to convert people, but it's more supposed to address people who understand that it's a problem, but don't really know what to do and feel overwhelmed about it. There's so many problems, things that are happening in the world, and it can feel very overwhelming. Like the worst for me is when I read about like microplastics are in clouds and they're like in parts of the world where like humans aren't really living, but they're everywhere. And that's one that gets me, where I'm like, what do we even do from now on? But there are a lot of ways to be proactive. And the message of this will be to say that, just find the thing that you're interested in and get involved locally if that's, what works for you, or focus on groups that are more global. Just really find what you're interested in, that you're passionate about, because that's what will make you like take the steps to do something rather than worrying about everything else. And then we have to trust that everybody else is doing something. And so trust that, if you're not a scientist, trust that scientists are doing something, finding out the research, and trust that people are trying to take that scientific information and apply it to a community or changing laws. There's all kinds of different avenues to take, and there's no one right way or wrong way. There's just multiple ways. We do have to sort of be focused and organized. So you can find an organization already doing something, or if you feel like there's one that's not, like you should organize it. So it's just meant to empower people. I feel like with the mainstream media, we have a filter of what we see. And social media, I feel, is really helpful in that you can connect with other groups and people that are doing different things. And you can see more activists through social media and what they're doing. And I feel like that's very empowering to just know that other people are doing things. And so this zine is meant to just highlight some of those things that people are doing, and also encourage people to trust in whatever you're personally interested in, and know that it can be very valuable, or is very valuable.
Yeah, awesome. Sorry, I've said awesome so many times, but it really is awesome. Those are all of the questions that I have for you. Is there anything else that you feel like we should add in, or?
It's nice to end on the zine, because I feel like that is where I'm trying to culminate a lot of ideas and have this broader message of like encouraging one another, and how to take steps forward and have meaningful action and meaningful change. Like I was saying, like my interests are always varying, and I like to learn about different topics, and I'm trying for myself to like understand what is my goal in learning all of this, or what is the purpose of learning all of this, and then how does it benefit other people. Like I feel like when I was working in marine sciences and having kids, I don't know, it was all a lot more personal. Like I enjoyed working in a laboratory because, I had like a small group of people that I worked with, and that small little family. And I liked that because I'm mostly introverted. But now I'm really trying to understand how I can have a larger impact with my local community, and then also connecting with ideas more globally or regionally, how to pull it together, how to connect different ideas, different movements, and how they're all related. And I feel like for me, the bottom line comes down to the climate crisis, and a lot of people are unsure of what their future is going to be like. And we have a lot of people in power who are much older and have seen the world function in a totally different way, and it worked for them, but they kind of didn't plan for the future, and we're all going to kind of suffer the consequences of that. But there are so many ways that we can be empowered to make changes, and I feel like a larger structural change is at hand. Also, another reason for the title of Revolution Zine, like we need a revolution of some sort in how we look at the world, how we care about our environment, right? If a corporation can have so many rights, like why can't we continue pushing for rights for the environment, for species, so that nature is a respected part of our community, and any kind of decisions that we make needs to be about the resources that we have that are actually limited. We think we have unlimited growth, but we don't. Like we have finite resources, but we can work to use them better. We can work to have the purpose of what we do to be benefiting communities, benefit people, uplift people, make sure people aren't houseless and unfed, right? All of these need to be incorporated into how we think about our environment and how we use it and how we take care of each other.
You've mentioned in a previous conversation that your target audience for this zine is kind of younger people who are thinking about how to make a difference in their future and kind of go along with that revolution of making things better. And I feel like that general idea also connects to what you're doing at the Marine Science Center of working with scientists to kind of change the way that we think about science and connect to it and place value on it through presenting the new lens of art. And I see that happening in a lot of places. So it really does feel like a kind of movement towards that, or a kind of revolution.
Yeah, and I think as the artist, it's kind of strange. Like, people here have been very encouraging and like want my opinion, and they want like this out of the box artist ideas. But it's also kind of sad that like people who are in the sciences or something, like in these jobs, don't feel like they had the freedom to say however they feel, right? Because they have to be bound by the structure. But I think we can also work within the structure to make changes as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking with us today. I think, yeah, that's a great ending.
Yeah, thank you so much for reaching out to me and inviting me to be on the podcast.
Thanks for tuning into Shellphone. To learn more about our projects, visit our website at breachthesurface.org or our social media at breachthesurface. To learn more about Emy's projects, you can find her on Instagram at Emy Daniels Art or on her website at emydaniels.com.